The Forgotten Menace. Across the vast galactic Confederacy, humans were nothing more than cautionary tales. Stories told to frighten unruly children or entertain patrons in dingy spaceport bars. Be careful, or the humans will get you, parents of a dozen species would warn. Most younglings would giggle, knowing full well that humans were as real as the mythical beasts from ancient texts. The official history was simple. Humans never existed. A fabrication. A collective delusion that spread through primitive civilizations during the Great Expansion. The Confederacy's archival authority had declared this as unassailable fact for nearly 3 centuries. Yet Archon Commander Talavex remembered differently. The aging Ceridian had served in the final campaigns, though she spoke of it to no one. Her carapace, once gleaming blue, had faded to a dull gray with age. 6 of her 8 limbs had grown stiff, and her compound eyes had lost much of their luster, but her memory remained intact. They weren't erased, she would sometimes mutter to herself in the privacy of her dwelling. They left. On the prosperous trade world of Nebulon Prime, Minister Doska addressed the Confederacy Assembly, voice booming through the Grand Chamber. Our economic expansion continues unimpeded. The Outer Rim territories now account for 37% of our gross production. The barbarian Kralviks have been pacified, and the rebellion on Sartaxis has been. The chamber lights flickered. Once, twice, then stabilized. Minister Doska paused, mandibles clicking in annoyance. As I was saying, the rebellion on Sartaxis has been. The massive holographic display behind him sputtered, then changed. The Confederacy emblem vanished, replaced by unfamiliar symbols. Straight lines. Sharp angles. No curves or spirals as was common in Confederacy script. Silence fell as the assembly stared at the display. Then came a sound. A pulsing, rhythmic tone that seemed to penetrate the very bones of all present. "What is the meaning of this?" demanded High Chancellor Xor. "Security." But security personnel stood frozen, weapons half-raised, as the symbols rearranged themselves into recognizable Confederate script. We have VVRE2RNED. The message lingered for precisely 17 seconds, then disappeared. The chamber erupted into chaos. 3 light cycles later, the High Council of the Confederacy convened an emergency session. Representatives from all 27 member species gathered in the secure bunker beneath the assembly building. The disturbance was detected simultaneously across 14 core worlds, reported Security Director Nizara, her serpentine body coiled tightly in distress. Our technicians have traced the signal's origin to the Forbidden Zone. A murmur rippled through the gathering. The Forbidden Zone, the vast region of space beyond the Rigel expanse that had been declared off-limits by Confederate decree for centuries. Official records claimed the area contained dangerous spatial anomalies. The truth, known only to the highest echelons, was far more troubling. "Impossible," snapped Chancellor Xor. "Nothing exists in the Forbidden Zone. Nothing could survive there." Talavex, present only because of her historical expertise, cleared her throat. "May I speak, Chancellor?" All eyes turned to the elderly Ceridian. The signal bears the hallmarks of human communication protocols. The directness, the brevity, the simultaneous broadcast across multiple systems. This was their signature approach during the Severance War. "Preposterous," sputtered Minister Doska. "Humans are myths, legends. They never existed except in primitive cultural narratives." Talavex's compound eyes glittered. "I was there, Minister, 300 cycles ago. I saw them, fought them, and watched as they disappeared beyond the Rigel expanse. We didn't defeat them. They chose to leave." Before Doska could retort, the chamber's communication system activated. The central holographic projector displayed the face of Admiral Cross, commander of the Confederate Border Fleet. "Chancellor, we have contact. Multiple unknown vessels have emerged from the Forbidden Zone. They're not responding to standard hails and are advancing toward Confederate space at incredible velocity." "How many vessels, Admiral?" asked Chancellor Xor, his dorsal spines rigidly erect in alarm. 3. No, 5. Wait. Admiral Kraz looked off-screen, his facial tentacles writhing in distress. New readings coming in. Dozens. Hundreds. Our sensors can't get accurate counts. They're employing some form of advanced cloaking technology. Deploy the 7th and 9th fleets, ordered Chancellor Xor. Establish a defensive perimeter at the Tachyon line. No unauthorized vessel crosses into Confederate space. Understood, Chancellor. But there's something else. We're receiving a directed transmission from the lead vessel. It's different from the previous broadcast, more extensive, and it's specifically requesting to speak with. The Admiral hesitated. With whom, Admiral? Pressed Chancellor Xor. With Archean Commander Talavex, sir. All eyes in the chamber turned toward the elderly Xeridian, who sat perfectly still, her compound eyes reflecting the holographic display. How could they possibly know you're here? Whispered Security Director Nizara. Because they remember, replied Talavex quietly. Just as I remember them. The transmission was routed to the council chamber. The holographic display flickered, then stabilized to reveal a figure that sent waves of shock through the assembled dignitaries. The being was Bikdal, with smooth, pale skin covering its face and hands. No carapace, no scales, no visible protective adaptations. 2 forward-facing eyes, a small nasal opening, and a lipless mouth. It wore dark, form-fitting attire with no visible insignia or rank markings. A human. Exactly as described in the Forbidden Archives. Exactly as Talavex remembered. Greetings, Confederacy representatives, the human said in flawless galactic standard. I am Admiral Seth Reynolds of the Earth Reclamation Fleet. I speak for humanity. High Chancellor Xor recovered first, rising to his full height. This is an illegal incursion into Confederate space. Your vessels will withdraw immediately or face military response. The human, Reynolds, smiled faintly. The expression sent chills through many present. In Confederate species, exposed teeth were universally a sign of aggression. Your military poses no threat to us, Chancellor, but we haven't come to fight. At least not yet. We've come for truth, and for Archean Commander Talavex. I am here, said Talavex, moving forward into the projection field. You remember an old soldier, Admiral Reynolds. We remember everything, Commander Talavex, including the Pact of Rigel, including your role in preserving the truth when others sought to erase it. Minister Doska's facial ridges flushed purple with rage. This is absurd. We're communicating with phantoms. Humans never existed outside of primitive mythology. Reynolds' attention shifted to Doska. Minister Doska of House Varn, third-generation descendant of Grand Marshal Doska who led the campaign against Nuterra. You've benefited well from the lies your forebearer helped propagate. The minister stepped back, mandibles clicking in shocked surprise. Let me be clear, continued Reynolds. 300 years ago, humanity faced extinction at Confederate hands, not because we were a threat, but because we refused to conform, because our potential frightened you. We made a choice then, to retreat beyond the Rigel expanse, rather than fight a war that would devastate both sides. You were losing, interjected Chancellor Xor. The historical records are clear. The historical records were falsified, cut in Reynolds. As Archean Commander Talavex can confirm, we weren't defeated. We withdrew after securing the Pact of Rigel, a non-aggression treaty signed by your predecessors, guaranteeing that humanity would not be pursued beyond the expanse, and that the truth of our existence would be preserved. The second condition was not honored, said Talavex quietly. Within 50 cycles, the official narrative was altered. Within 100, humanity had been reduced to myth. A necessary measure, defended Security Director Nizara. The panic that followed the Severance War was manufactured to justify the erasure, finished Reynolds. But we didn't disappear. We evolved. We expanded. We built civilizations beyond your imagining in the regions you feared to explore. The massive view screen behind Reynolds shifted to display a star map. Vast regions beyond the Rigel expanse glowed with light. Hundreds of star systems, thousands of worlds, all interconnected by lines representing travel routes or communication networks. The human confederation now spans nearly 1/3 of the galaxy you never explored, said Reynolds. We've developed technologies you cannot comprehend and formed alliances with species you've never encountered. If you've been so successful beyond the expanse, why return now? Asked Talavex. Reynolds' expression softened slightly. Because of the pact, Archon Commander. Because despite everything, some of us believed that coexistence was possible, that the Confederacy might eventually outgrow its fear. And now, prompted Chancellor Xor, dorsal spines quivering. Now we've detected your expansion efforts pushing toward the Rigel boundary. Exploration vessels, military outposts, mining operations, all prohibited under the pact, all suggesting that the Confederacy is preparing to violate the one treaty it actually upheld. Preposterous, sputtered Minister Doska. We're simply securing our borders against myths. Reynolds asked with that same chilling smile. Your official position is that humans don't exist, Minister. Yet you're fortifying the boundary against our return. The contradiction is telling. Before Doska could respond, alarms blared throughout the chamber. Admiral Krause's image reappeared beside Reynolds. Chancellor, the unknown vessels. They've bypassed our defensive line without engaging. They're appearing across Confederate space. Nebulon Prime, Zerita, Sartaxis, Doskin. Every major system simultaneously. Impossible, gasped Chancellor Xor. No fleet could move that quickly or coordinate across such distances. As I said, Reynolds remarked calmly, we've developed technologies beyond your understanding. The vessels you're detecting across your systems are merely a fraction of our capabilities. A demonstration, if you will. On worlds across the Confederacy, citizens looked skyward as massive vessels appeared in orbit. Not the curved organic designs of Confederate ships, but angular geometric constructions of dark material that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light. They deployed no weapons, made no aggressive moves. They simply watched. In the council chamber, panic threatened to overtake reason until Talavex spoke again. What do you want, Admiral Reynolds? You speak of the pact, of coexistence. If not war, then what? Reynolds nodded appreciatively at the elderly Xeridian. The truth, Commander. Public acknowledgement of humanity's existence. Reinstatement of accurate historical records. Recognition of our sovereign territory beyond the Rigel expanse. And accountability for those who orchestrated our erasure from galactic memory. You demand the impossible, said Chancellor Xor. Such revelations would destabilize the entire Confederacy. Perhaps it needs destabilizing, replied Reynolds. A civilization built on deliberate falsehoods is already unstable at its foundation. We're offering you the chance to correct course. And if we refuse? Asked Security Director Nizara. Reynolds' expression remained neutral, but his voice carried unmistakable weight. Then we demonstrate why your ancestors feared human potential enough to try erasing us from history. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the council chamber in stunned silence. On the main view screen, Admiral Krause reported that the human vessels remained in position throughout Confederate space, taking no further action. Talavex rose slowly, her aged carapace creaking with the effort. 300 years ago, I witnessed the signing of the Pact of Rigel. I was tasked with preserving the complete historical record, a task I failed to fulfill as the political winds shifted. Now the past has returned, as it always does when buried rather than confronted. What do you suggest, Archon Commander? Asked Chancellor Xor, suddenly looking very old himself. I suggest we listen to Admiral Reynolds. I suggest we tell the truth. She looked around the chamber at the representatives of 27 species united in a confederation built partially on shared prosperity, partially on shared lies. I suggest we remember that humans didn't leave because they were weak. They left because they chose peace when they could have chosen annihilation. Ours, not theirs. As the Council erupted into heated debate, in orbit above 100 Confederate worlds, the dark ships of humanity waited in patient silence. 3 centuries was but a moment in the span of galactic history. They could wait a little longer for the truth to emerge. On Nebulon Prime, a young Ceridia scholar named Karavex, distant relation to the Archean commander, stared up at the unfamiliar ship hovering above the capital city. Unlike her fellow citizens who fled in terror, she felt an inexplicable fascination. The beings that controlled that vessel weren't monsters from childhood stories. They were real, and they had a history intertwined with her own people. As night fell and the strange ship's outline became limned with subtle lights, Karavex made a decision. If the authorities wouldn't tell the truth about these returned humans, she would find it herself. Elsewhere in the galaxy, the old protocols activated, hidden archives unlocked, suppressed records resurfaced. The machinery of truth, long dormant, began to turn once more. Humanity had returned, and the galaxy would never be the same. Reckoning of the stars. Karavex moved silently through the darkened halls of the Nebulon Prime Historical Repository. The building, normally bustling with researchers and tourists during daylight hours, was eerily quiet after curfew. The emergency restrictions imposed after the appearance of the human vessels had emptied the streets, but had done nothing to quell the young Ceridian's curiosity. Her access card, borrowed from her academic supervisor without permission, granted her entry to the lower levels where the physical archives were stored. Digital records could be altered without trace, but physical documents required actual destruction. And bureaucracies, even ones built on deliberate falsehoods, rarely destroyed anything completely. Section R7. She muttered to herself, scanning the dimly lit rows of preservation cases. Historical exclusions predating Confederation standardization. Her compound eyes, better adapted to darkness than most species, spotted the secure cabinet tucked into an alcove behind more prominent displays. The locking mechanism was ancient, a physical key rather than biometric or neural scan. Perfect. From her satchel, Karavex withdrew a small device her friend in engineering had assured her would open any mechanical lock. 3 tense minutes later, the cabinet door swung silently open. Inside, sealed preservation cubes contained artifacts labeled with dates from before the Confederacy's founding. Karavex moved methodically, scanning each label until she found what she sought. Severance War artifacts. Restricted. Security authorization level 9 required. Her hearts raced. Security level 9 was reserved for information deemed potentially destabilizing to Confederate society. Her academic clearance was a mere level 2. The preservation cube contained physical objects. A tattered fabric patch bearing unfamiliar symbols, a small device of unknown purpose, and, most valuable, a data crystal of pre-Confederate design. Such crystals were incompatible with modern systems, which meant they had likely never been digitized or altered after their creation. Karavex slipped the crystal into her satchel. The alarm would sound the moment she left the building with restricted materials, but she had prepared for that. The maintenance tunnels beneath the repository connected to the old transit system, unused since the automated hover network had been implemented decades ago. As she made her way toward the emergency exit, a sudden noise froze her in place. Voices. Security personnel, their heavy footfalls echoing down the corridor. All repositories are to be sealed by direct order of the Chancellor, a gruff voice announced. No exceptions, no delays. Level 10 clearance required for access until further notice. Karavex pressed herself into a shadowed alcove as the security team passed. Their conversation confirmed her suspicions. They're locking down everything related to the Forbidden Zone and pre-Confederation history, one guard said quietly. Whatever those ships are, the Council is terrified. My cousin on Doskin said they just appeared, replied another. 1 minute empty space, the next. There they were. No warp signatures, no transition distortion. just appeared. Spatial anomalies, the first guard insisted. Like the official reports say, spatial anomalies that send transmissions and make demands. Don't be naive. Their voices faded as they continued down the corridor. Kiravex waited until silence returned, then slipped toward the maintenance access panel. Within moments, she had disappeared into the forgotten infrastructure beneath the capital. On the Confederate military outpost orbiting Doskin, Admiral Cross faced a communication screen showing the grim visage of Chancellor Xor. "They're completely impervious to our scans," Cross reported. "Energy signatures unlike anything in our database. No detectable weapons systems. But, prompted the Chancellor. "But they don't need visible weapons, sir. 3 hours ago, we launched a covert strike against the vessel orbiting Sartaxis. 12 of our most advanced stealth fighters, approaching from 12 different vectors." And Admiral Cross's facial tentacles drooped. "The fighters disappeared, sir. Not destroyed, not disabled. They simply ceased to exist the moment they crossed some invisible perimeter around the human vessel. No debris, no energy discharge, no radiation signature. One moment they existed, the next, gone." Chancellor Xor's dorsal spines flattened against his back, a sign of extreme distress in his species. "Have there been any further communications?" "Nothing since the initial broadcast, sir. The vessels remain in stable orbit, passive but watching. The Council remains deadlocked," Xor said quietly. "Minister Doska and his faction insist we must never acknowledge these beings as humans. They believe doing so would validate 3 centuries of conspiracy theories and undermine Confederate authority." "And the opposing view, sir?" "Arction Commander Talavex leads those who believe we must acknowledge the truth, particularly given the overwhelming technological superiority these visitors have demonstrated." Admiral Cross hesitated, then spoke carefully. "Chancellor, my tactical assessment is that we cannot prevail in direct conflict with these vessels. Whatever technology they possess, it exceeds our understanding by orders of magnitude. I'm aware of our military realities, Admiral, but the political realities are equally daunting. The Confederacy's legitimacy rests partially on historical continuity, if we admit that our founding narratives were deliberately falsified. With respect, sir, our legitimacy will mean nothing if these humans decide to demonstrate their full capabilities." The Chancellor's image flickered as he shifted uncomfortably. "We have 24 hours before we must respond to their demands. Continue monitoring. Report any changes immediately." "Yes, Chancellor. There is one other matter." Admiral Cross hesitated. "We've detected unusual information access patterns across the Confederacy. Historical repositories, sealed archives, restricted archaeological data, all being accessed or removed despite security protocols. Dissidents seeking to validate their theories about humans," Thor said dismissively. "Security will handle them." "Perhaps, sir. Or perhaps the truth is simply refusing to remain buried any longer." In an abandoned mechanical relay station beneath Nebulon Prime, Kiravex connected the ancient data crystal to a cobbled-together interface device. Her friend Lortax, a tech specialist with gray-green skin and enormous multifaceted eyes, watched nervously. "If they track the power usage, we're finished," Lortax whispered, his breathing apparatus wheezing slightly with anxiety. "They won't," Kiravex assured him. "This station was decommissioned centuries ago. It doesn't even appear on modern grid maps." The makeshift reader hummed, struggling to interface with the alien crystal technology. Finally, the attached display flickered to life, showing a menu in an antiquated dialect of Confederate standard. "Personal log. Commander Shenwei, Earth Diplomatic Corps," Kiravex read aloud. "Final entry before implementation of the Rigel protocols." The recording began playing. A human appeared, similar to Admiral Reynolds but with distinctive differences in facial structure and skin pigmentation. The being looked tired, determined. "This will likely be my final official record," the human began. Tomorrow, the last human vessels will depart Confederate space as stipulated in the Pact of Rigel. I have no illusions about what will follow. Despite the treaty's guarantees about preserving the historical record, Grand Marshal Doska's faction has already begun the process of revision. They speak of narrative stabilization and cultural cohesion, but these are merely euphemisms for erasure. The human side running a hand through its head fibers. Humanity's greatest crime was not our technology or our biology or even our unpredictability, as they claimed. It was our refusal to assimilate, our insistence on self-determination. For a galactic society built on conformity and carefully managed evolution, we were the ultimate disruption. The recording continued, detailing the true history of human-Confederate relations. How humans had been welcomed initially for their innovative approaches and technological contributions. How tensions grew as humans established independent colonies rather than integrating into existing Confederate systems. How fear turned to hostility, hostility to sabotage, and sabotage to open conflict. The final battle at Rigel was not our defeat, though history will record it as such. Commander Shenwei explained. It was a demonstration. We showed the Confederate fleet a fraction of what we had developed in secret, capabilities that could have destroyed them completely. Instead, we offered peace. The Pact of Rigel established a separation. Humanity would retreat beyond the expanse, taking our dangerous unpredictability with us. In return, the Confederacy would acknowledge the truth and respect our territory. We knew the first condition might eventually be broken, but we believed the second would be honored. Commander Shen's expression hardened. Before we depart, we've left safeguards, dormant technologies that will activate if the Confederacy ever attempts to cross the expanse in force, and archives, hidden, protected, containing the truth. Someday, when fear has faded, perhaps understanding can grow in its place. The recording ended with a direct address to whoever might find it. If you're viewing this record, either the Confederacy has finally embraced honesty, or someone has been brave enough to seek truth despite prohibition. Either way, know this: humans did not disappear. We simply gave you the space you demanded. The stars beyond the expanse are vast. We have room to grow, to evolve in our own way. But we will never forget where we came from, and we will be watching. The display went dark. Karavex and Lortax sat in stunned silence. We need to share this, Karavex said finally. The entire Confederacy needs to see. See what? Treason. A voice interrupted from the shadows. Security Director Nizara slithered into view, flanked by armed guards. You've violated at least 17 security protocols, young scholar. Accessing restricted materials during a Level 1 emergency. Tampering with historical artifacts. Conspiracy to disseminate classified information. Kiravex's heart sank, but she stood her ground. The classification itself is the real crime, Director. The people deserve to know the truth. Nizara's scaled face remained impassive. The truth is whatever serves the stability of the Confederacy. Now surrender the data crystal and come with. A blinding light suddenly filled the chamber, causing all present to shield their visual organs. When it faded, a new figure stood among them. A human. Not Admiral Reynolds, but a female of the species, tall and dark-skinned, wearing the same unmarked attire. She nodded politely to the astonished gathering. Security Director Nizara, I presume. I am Commander Amarachen, Liaison Officer of the Earth Reclamation Fleet. She turned to Karavex. And you must be Karavex, descendant of Arkshan Commander Talavex. Your ancestor spoke highly of your potential, though she worried about your tendency toward reckless curiosity. How? Sputtered Nizara, her guards raising weapons uncertainly. How did I appear here? How did we know about this hidden meeting? How do we know about Karavex? Commander Chen smiled. We've been monitoring Confederate communication networks and biosignatures since our arrival, not to mention the activation of certain artifacts we left behind centuries ago. She gestured to the data crystal. Commander Shen was my great-grandfather, actually. His testimony, is but one piece of the historical record your government has attempted to suppress. Nizara recovered her composure, serpentine body coiling defensively. This is a Confederate security matter. Your presence here is a violation of territorial sovereignty. Technically, Director, our presence everywhere in Confederate space is such a violation. Chen replied calmly. Yet here we are. The question is, why have we chosen this particular moment to return? Before Nizara could respond, Chen's communications device emitted a soft tone. She checked it, then smiled. Perfect timing. I believe you'll all want to see this. From her wrist, she projected a holographic display showing the Confederate Council chamber. Chancellor Xor stood at the central podium, addressing not just the Council, but based on the broadcast indicators, the entire Confederacy. Citizens of the Galactic Confederacy, the Chancellor began, his voice solemn. For 3 centuries, our civilization has propagated a falsehood, a deliberate erasure of historical fact for the sake of what our predecessors deemed cultural stability. Today, that falsehood ends. Nizara hissed in dismay as the Chancellor continued. The beings whose vessels currently orbit our worlds are not invaders or myths. They are humans, a species whose existence has been systematically removed from our official records, following the Severance War and the Pact of Rigel. The Chancellor proceeded to outline the true history, matching almost exactly the account from Commander Shen's recording. He explained the original conflict, the demonstration of power at the Battle of Rigel, and the terms of the pact that followed. Our recent explorations toward the Rigel expanse, conducted under the guise of security operations, constituted a violation of that ancient agreement. The humans have returned not to conquer, but to remind us of our broken promises. As the broadcast continued, Commander Chen turned to Kirivex. Your great-grandmother argued passionately for this outcome. She believed transparency was the only path forward. You've been in contact with Archon Commander Talavex all along, Kirivex realized. She was your what? Agent? Ally? Witness, replied Chen simply. When the pact was signed, she vowed to preserve the truth, even as her superiors began dismantling it. For 3 centuries, her bloodline has safeguarded fragments of human history, passing knowledge from generation to generation, including to you, though you may not have recognized it as such. Kirivex's mind raced through childhood memories, her great-grandmother's strange stories, the imagination exercises that involved envisioning beings with no carapace, the inexplicable emphasis on questioning official histories. What happens now? She asked. On the holographic display, Chancellor Xor was announcing the formation of a Historical Truth Commission and the immediate cessation of all military activities near the Rigel expanse. Now, said Commander Chen, we begin again, not as myths or monsters in each other's stories, but as civilizations acknowledging their shared past and potential future. Nizara, still processing the Chancellor's extraordinary broadcast, found her voice. This will destabilize everything. Centuries of Confederate unity, undermined in a single transmission. Perhaps, acknowledged Chen, or perhaps honesty will provide a stronger foundation than carefully curated falsehoods ever could. The security director's communicator buzzed urgently. She checked it, her scales paling. The Chancellor is ordering the immediate release of all restricted historical archives. Full public access. No exceptions. Progress, remarked Chen with satisfaction. She turned her attention back to Kirivex and Lortax. As for you two, I believe you might be interested in a proposition. The Earth Confederation is establishing a liaison office on Nebulon Prime. We'll need individuals familiar with both Confederate culture and human history. Kirivex's compound eyes widened. You want us to work with humans. To build bridges, corrected Chen, between what was and what could be. One standard month later, Chancellor Xor and Admiral Reynolds stood on the observation deck of the Confederate Grand Assembly, watching as representatives from both civilizations mingled cautiously below. The Historical Truth Commission had worked tirelessly, releasing centuries of suppressed information into public knowledge banks across the Confederacy. Your civilization has shown remarkable resilience, noted Reynolds. We expected more resistance to such fundamental revelations. Chancellor Xor's dorsal spines rustle thoughtfully. Truth has a power of its own. Admiral, once unleashed, it creates its own momentum. Yet there are still those who oppose normalization of relations, Reynolds observed, gesturing subtly toward Minister Daska, who stood isolated at the far end of the chamber. There will always be those who prefer comfortable falsehoods to uncomfortable realities, replied Xor. But they are fewer each day. Below them, Kiravex led a small group of Confederate scholars in conversation with human scientists. The young Ceridian had become something of a celebrity, the academic who helped uncover the truth that changed galactic history. What I still don't fully understand, said Xor, is why you waited 3 centuries to return. Surely you monitored our development. You must have known we were violating the pact long before our recent expeditions. Reynolds smiled, no longer the threatening expression it had once seemed to Confederate eyes, now that cultural context had been established. We needed to be certain, he explained, not just of our ability to enforce the pact, but of our own readiness to reconnect. Isolation changes a civilization, Chancellor. We needed 3 centuries to become something more than what we were when we left, a species defined by our conflict with yours. And what have you become? Asked Xor. Reynolds gestured toward the vast viewport, where the stars glittered against the blackness of space. Among them now hung a new station, a joint human-Confederate construction that served as neutral ground for ongoing diplomatic relations. We've become explorers again, he said simply. Beyond the expanse lies half a galaxy your people have never seen. Species, phenomena, and possibilities beyond imagining. We've mapped it, connected with it, learned from it. And now you wish to share it. Partnership has advantages isolation cannot provide, Reynolds acknowledged. Despite our differences, humans and the Confederate species share something vital, curiosity. The desire to understand what lies beyond the next horizon. Below them, Archean Commander Talavex had joined the gathering, her ancient frame supported by medical technology from both civilizations. Beside her stood Commander Chen, the two engaged in animated conversation, a bridge between past and future. The old myths about humans focused on your destructive potential, mused Chancellor Xor. Your weapons, your unpredictability, your refusal to conform. The stories never mentioned your capacity for forgiveness. Perhaps because that was the quality your predecessors found most incomprehensible, suggested Reynolds. That we could have the power to destroy, yet choose cooperation instead. A lesson we're still learning. Xor admitted, conformity brings stability, but at the cost of innovation. Your return has forced us to confront that trade-off. Reynolds nodded. And isolation preserved our autonomy, but limited our perspective. Perhaps both our civilizations have been incomplete without the other. As night fell across Nebulon Prime, citizens gathered in public squares to watch the human vessels that had terrified them weeks earlier now performing a synchronized departure. One by one, the massive ships ascended beyond the atmosphere, their dark hulls catching the last rays of the setting sun. But they were not all leaving. Some would remain. Diplomatic vessels, cultural exchange stations, research outposts. The beginnings of a renewed connection between civilizations that had once believed coexistence impossible. In her new office at the Joint Historical Commission, Kirevex added Commander Shenwei's data crystal to the growing repository of recovered artifacts. The truth, long buried but never truly forgotten, was finally taking its rightful place in the shared history of both peoples. They were never just stories, she whispered to herself, echoing the words that had begun appearing on walls and communications networks across the Confederacy, a spontaneous movement embracing the revelations that had shaken their society to its core. Outside her window, the first joint human-Confederate vessel prepared for its maiden voyage. Named Remembrance, it would travel to the edge of the Rigel expanse, once a boundary of fear, now a threshold of possibility. Aboard the vessel, Arction Commander Talavex stood alongside Admiral Reynolds and Chancellor Xor as the final launch preparations were completed. Despite her age, she had insisted on being present for this historic moment. 300 years ago, I watched humanity leave, she told them, her ancient voice steady with conviction. Today, I witness our reunification. The circle closes. As the Remembrance's engines powered up, communications channels across two civilizations opened simultaneously to broadcast the joint declaration. We acknowledge our shared past, both its triumphs and its failures. We commit to a future built on truth rather than fear, and we go forward together into stars that belong to no single species, but to all who dare to explore them. The ship lifted gracefully from its berth, accelerating toward the darkness beyond Nebulon Prime. Behind it followed vessels from both civilizations, once adversaries, now partners in a journey without end. Among the stars, myths had become reality. And reality, at last, had surpassed the myths. The end.